What is up? This is Epic Journey here with a look at drug legalization and just some basic points and arguments to understand the issues at play a little better. Now, first off, you know, drugs, why are they illegal? And if you really take it down to the root, to the basic bare issue of why drugs are illegal, it is because a small group of individuals, a small ruling elite, you could call them Congress, you could call them the government, whatever, but a small minority, small tiny fraction of the population, a group of ruling elites, decided that drugs should be made illegal, that human beings essentially taking a plant or any substance within their own body, doing harm to no one else but themselves, taking a substance to whether it's augment their state of mind or calm themselves or whatever, that these people should not be allowed the freedom to essentially pursue their own happiness in the way they see fit. These ruling elites determine that the people are essentially don't have the intellectual capacity or don't whatever aren't capable of managing themselves. So drugs are made illegal. And when you look at it, people using drugs in America, when there was a huge upsurge of people getting thrown in prison, actually was during the 1980s. And what's so incredible about this is that the Reagan administration, which came into office 1981, left 1989, but the Reagan administration essentially beat this drum of personal freedom, that who are the government, who's this ruling elite to rule people, and yet at the same time they really started pumping drug users into the prison system. And whatever, the Reagan administration made the call that a small group of ruling elites knew it was better for the people than the people themselves. Now, I want to take a look at who is actually being hurt by the individuals using drugs. I mean, well, we know that the drug users are hurt by using drugs, and we should understand that not all drugs are the same. I mean, something like heroin is incredibly addictive and it's very easy to overdose on. It's more lethal, significantly more lethal than alcohol. I mean, alcohol is legal, all right? And if you believe in the idea of personal freedom, and most people do, we accept that alcohol should be legal. You could call it just social concept, like social convention. It's like alcohol's legal, so we accept that it should remain legal. But you take a drug like heroin, more addictive, more more dangerous, more lethal, easier to overdose on. But then you look at a drug like marijuana or MDMA or LSD or magic mushrooms. All of those drugs are less addictive than alcohol and far more difficult to overdose on. I mean, and you look at a drug like LSD, psilocybin mushrooms, marijuana, they're virtually impossible to overdose on. So you could say, well, they can remain illegal because they can impair people. These drugs impair people, but alcohol impairs people as well, and MDMA does not. So MDMA is actually less addictive than alcohol. It's harder to overdose on if you look at the effective dose relative to the lethal dose. And yet it doesn't impair one's ability to operate machinery or drive. Yet it's illegal for, well, no reason that has anything to do with logic. And you could say, well, LSD impairs one's ability to drive, but so does alcohol. Ultimately, you're trusting people with the ability to not operate heavy machinery or an automobile when using alcohol. There's already the trust factor there. You already acknowledge that if you are consuming a substance that can alter your mind, like alcohol does, alter your ability to think, there's already some sort of trust factor, And if you are caught using alcohol and driving, you will get arrested. And that's the way it absolutely should be. But so you could say, well, look, going back to who is punished in this. You throw a drug user in jail and you punish them for simply consuming a substance that they choose to, whatever, alter their state of mind or whatever, to gain some semblance of happiness, consuming a substance. And then you throw them in jail. Well, obviously, the drug users is punished, but there's another level to it. I mean, to actually arrest the drug user, it requires a police officer. And, we could say what we want about police, but just speaking objectively, a police officer is a government employee, and they do not work for free. A government employee is paid for by taxpayers. And I understand, almost everyone would agree that police officers are necessary to stop, well, violent crime and whatnot. But if someone's smoking marijuana and a police officer pursues them and arrests them for smoking marijuana, it's ultimately the taxpayers who have to pay for that arrest. And then there's a prosecutor trying to put that person in jail, and there is a judge, and they don't come cheap. Again, the taxpayer is being punished. We, the people, the good, honest taxpayer, are being punished because a small minority of ruling elites somehow thought it was a good idea to stop people from smoking a plant. We, the taxpayers. And, all right, fine. Then you have to pay the police. You got to pay the prosecutor. You got to pay the judge. Then what? You throw them in prison. And building prisons takes land. It takes raw materials. And then you need prison guards. And they aren't free either. So you throw someone in jail for a few years. You're paying for the prison guard's salary every single day for, well, I don't know, till whenever they decide to throw the guy out of jail. And you ruin the guy's life afterwards because they have a criminal record because they smoked marijuana. And let me say this, all right? I am not a drug user. But the idea of having to pay taxes, that my money that I work for is taken to essentially put people in jail. I don't understand why more people aren't outraged by this, that their money is being taken to stop people from smoking plants because a small group of ruling elites somehow thought this was a good idea at some point in time. Right? And then you look at it like, is it really make sense for the taxpayers to have this burden of throwing people in jail for pursuing their own individual self-interest and doing harm to no one else? They're literally doing no harm to anyone else. Right? And now there are two paths you can go on with respect to this, the war on drugs. You can decriminalize drugs, which will create a stronger black market. And decriminalization, essentially, you wouldn't put them in jail. You wouldn't have to pay for the judge, the prosecutor, the prison guard, the police officer who makes the arrest. You wouldn't have to pay for them with decriminalization, which, in a sense, is a step in the right direction. So there is good there, but you create a black market for drugs. You make the black market stronger. There already is a black market, but you incentivize the black market. You can, on some level, you can criminalize the black market and not punish the users. And for the most part, I would say it doesn't really make sense to punish someone who's just consuming a substance for their own pleasure. It makes no sense whatsoever. It's just completely illogical, completely counterintuitive to the concept of freedom itself. So, all right, you could decriminalize it, and then at that point, the taxpayers are, well, they don't have the burden of the criminal justice system, right? Or, for most drugs, not all drugs, but any drug that's less addictive and any drug that is, well, less lethal, harder to overdose on than alcohol. Maybe not every drug, but most of them. If it was legalized, then they could act as a substitute to alcohol. And that means there'd be less damage to society from alcohol because they would be consuming other less dangerous drugs. Individuals who, whatever, you go out on Friday night, some people would choose alcohol, or you could choose another substance that's far less dangerous, which would be better for you. And then, so you legalize it, and because, well, essentially these drugs are illegal at this point, you have leverage to actually put on fairly high taxes. And you could say, well, you can talk about the argument whether you'd want to tax it heavily or not tax it, but ultimately, if you understand that these people who are doing drugs are doing some degree of harm to themselves, and maybe they will need some sort of help in the future, in the name of freedom, you must consider that these people should be able to do what they want with their body anyway. You can only cage an individual so much. I mean, freedom itself is finite. We can't grow wings and learn to fly on our own. But to stop people from smoking a plant or whatever, it's it's totally counterintuitive. It's against everything within our constitution. You say, all right, well, you got legalization. If you actually tax these substances, and there is the leverage to tax because they are currently illegal, then once they're taxed, you can actually use that money to help schools, to help build roads, help build bridges. And another point is, I mean, police officers won't actually have to waste their time stopping people from, well, pursuing their own individual self interest. Police officers could then pursue violent criminals. They can actually pursue things which cause harm, pursue crime which causes harm to other people. And look, I mean, we have to understand that marijuana legalization seems to be moving along. There are a few dozen states already which have legalized medical marijuana. Alaska, Oregon, Washington, and Colorado have legalized recreational marijuana to some extent. It is very heavily regulated. And in the future, there will likely be more states which legalize marijuana, but they say marijuana is a gateway drug. I believe in the future, it'll essentially, marijuana will be a gateway towards legalization of other drugs, which, well, aren't particularly dangerous. I think a drug like heroin, it's hard to justify something so dangerous to legalize it. You can say, and perhaps decriminalization, or at the very least, I mean, to put people in jail for using drugs, for becoming addicted, it's, well, quite frankly, it's against everything that the United States and the very concept of freedom, the very concept of liberty, it goes against all of it. Human beings are supposed to have freedom. And you know what? At this point in time, marijuana legalization, it's favored by about, according to Gallup, 58% of the country. I mean, and in all likelihood, the younger generation favors legalization more than the older generation. The older generation, well, as time passes, they move on, and the younger generation, well, eventually they get the right to vote. So we are moving in that direction, but ultimately the argument of legalizing drugs beyond marijuana, legalization of more drugs, and just understanding the real arguments behind why drugs should be legalized. I mean, yes, ultimately it should come down to the issue of, are people free to make their own choices, or are a small group of ruling elites, are they the ones who will control our lives, and whether human beings, whether society is wise enough to make its own decisions. Anyway, thanks for listening. Don't forget to share, like, and subscribe to this video, especially share. If anything I say makes sense to you, please share this video. Till next time, this has been Epic Journey. Peace.